This is a follow-on video to the last one in which I laid straight track for my hidden carriage sidings. We'll be building some other stuff as well, namely the Peco Depot Shed, of which I have acquired many over the years. I've never actually bought one, but several people have given me spares that they didn't require. Accompanying that, we'll be dealing with an inspection pit, but not how it's intended to be used, because I haven't done one like that yet, and also how I do track that's inlaid into a concrete pad. We'll take a closer look at that later. Firstly, we'll have a look at the shed and the pit. I've temporarily laid some track in the vague direction of where it needs to go, and I created a base out of 60 thou plasticard. I cut it 170 millimeters wide, and the track centers need to be 67 millimeters, which is standard set track dimensions, 00 scale. I'm using 60 thou plasticard sheet for the base, and that's because it's 1.5 millimeters thick, which is exactly the same measurement as the cork that I've laid all of the track on in this area. Removing enough cork to get my base in, I've aligned it with the track centers into roughly the place where it's needed to go. You're going to have to endure some of my sketchy animations because it's an easier way for me to explain what I'm trying to do. On top of the baseboard, I've got 1.5 millimeter cork, and next to it I've got my sub base for the shed, which is 1.5 60 thou plasticard. Of that, the first scale 10 feet will be for the concrete pad at the front of the shed. Then we've got the small section of the shed wall or shed front. I've got another 6 feet beyond that before the start of the pit. So I'll mark out on the sub base the area that needs to be removed for the pit, cut those out, and then transfer those markings onto the baseboard, because we need to dig down into the baseboard probably about 10 millimeters. Won't go all the way through, well, depending on how thick your baseboard is, that is. I've used my router, because I have one, just to dig down that much. And I must have got the measurements just about right, because there seems to be a gap of about just a couple of millimeters underneath the inspection pit. Now I'm going to do the same in this video as I did in the fuel point video. Because they only supply a length of rail that barely covers the ends of the inspection pit, I take a full length piece of flexi track, remove the sleepers from the bit where I've calculated the pit needs to go, and then slide on the excess sleepers on the other end. So I end up with a pit in the middle of a long piece of flexi track, and that's because I like the least amount of rail joiners as possible. Now, because we want the floor of our shed and our concrete pad to be virtually flush with the top of our rails, we're going to have to build up the base a little bit. Now this is going to depend on what track system you're using. I'm using code 75 00 scale, which is the sleepers are 2 millimeters thick, so that's an 80 thou piece of plasticard to get up to that level, and then the rail is code 75 thou, plus it sits on a chair. So all in all, from the bottom of the sleeper to the top of the rail is 4 millimeters. So just to recap, we've got a 1.5 millimeter or 60 thou piece of styrene sheet to get us up to the same height as our cork sheet. Then a packing piece of 80,000 to get us up to the same height as our top of our sleepers. And then on top of that, we're going to put another piece of 60,000, and the top of that should be about 20 thou lower than the top of the rail, which is about enough. because we don't want it to be higher than the rail, otherwise we're going to lose electrical connection with the wheels. You might be able to just see it in that last shot that the edge that's butted up against the rail is tapered both at the top and the bottom. It's an easy job with a file, but the bottom needs to be done slightly more than the top, and that's because it has to fit into the web of the rail and slide over the top of the chairs that the rails sit on. I did take some photographs to explain this, but they're nowhere near as good as the diagrams that I've just drawn. From the angle of this next shot, hopefully it should become apparent what I'm trying to get at. I consider the outside pieces to be the easy bits to do. The inside of the tracks is a little more difficult. When I say difficult, I mean not really difficult. You have to be a little more precise with your measurements, that's all. So after cutting some styrene strips, 80 thou or 2mm, which is the same height as the sleepers, drop those in between, and then we can go and cut a piece of plasticard to fit in between the rails. So for me, 00 scale, the back-to-back measurement of the wheels is 14.7mm, or it should be around that figure. I take an extra millimetre off of that, which is 13.7mm, and then cut the piece of plasticard to that measurement. To make sure that we've got it all right, I can just put a flat ruler on the plasticard and push it up against the rail. Hopefully it won't go over the top. That means it's sitting just proud, and we will be able to get electrical connection between the rail and the wheels. The ultimate test, of course, would be to put an engine on and test it. Marvellous. Now for the shed, I'm not going to go into too much detail about construction of the shed, because the ones that I have were given to me already constructed. The motorising the doors, on the other hand, was another story, which I'm going to leave for another video. As we created a sort of lip around the outside for the building to sit on, it literally just clips into place. As for the doors, I have got another video on my channel that I did many years ago that shows the doors opening and a train going in and out. I'll leave a link to that video in the top corner, and I'd ask you to go and click on that video to watch it. It's only about a minute long, and see if you can tell the difference between what was and what is now. Like I say, I've got another video coming out on that one, and all I can say for the time being is I wish I had my Meccano set still, because I would have figured it out a lot quicker and a lot easier. Back to the pit, and I'm just going to paint it up with some Halford's primer to start off with. Masking was really easy on this one. I just used some offcuts of hardboard and wood. Leave that to dry for an hour, and then with some deck tan, pale grey and white, I'm just going to sponge that on, because I like doing it that way. And it doesn't involve an airbrush, which means everybody should be able to do this. I used a lot more deck tan and white than I did the grey, and that should be determined by the age and colour of the concrete that you're trying to portray. We'll touch on that a bit more when I do the weathering of track in a couple of videos' time. The lighting in my garage is not particularly great, and you can't really tell the difference between all the shades that are actually visible to the naked eye. What I can see though is some bare white plastic poking out, so I'm going to have to address that with a brush later. I'm also going to say that this isn't the only way that you can create a concrete hard standing with rails embedded in them. I've seen many other ways, one being using balsa wood or modelling clay or filler. I understand that everybody's individual and prefers different mediums to working. I prefer to work in the medium of plastic. The next video will be the trials and tribulations of trying to motorise the doors of a Peco Shed depot building. I wish I still had my Meccano set. I really do. Until then, Thanks for watching. See you very soon.